Hello everyone, welcome to this class on The Bluest Eye. It was published in 1970 by Toni Morrison. She is one of the central figures, one of the towering figures in American literature. This was her first novel. We have already discussed the plot of the novel, the main characters and the central themes and concerns of the novel in the previous classes. In this class, in this very short presentation, we'll try to locate this novel as a novel of black female experience. We'll try to see the events of the novel from the point of view of mainly two characters in this class, namely Pecola and Claudia. Let's get going. As we have already discussed, we're actually repeating it. The context of the novel, although the story happens in 1940-41, but it was published in 1970. So the context is there was a movement in America in 1960s. It was known as Black is Beautiful. But Toni Morrison was quite skeptical of this movement because the simplistic nature of this slogan, that is black is beautiful, she believed that this was not able and this was not adequate to dispel the long-term psychic effects of racism and sexism. So what we can understand from her skepticism is that she was a person who had deep knowledge about these psychological effects of racism and also sexism. So the discrimination of blacks in America was not something new, and it was making an impact. It had been making an impact for, in fact, many centuries. So a slogan like black is beautiful, although it was a marker of a change in America, it was not enough. As far as Toni Morrison was concerned, it was not enough to make that change and dispel that all the psychic effects. So if you when we think about the events of the novel, especially from the point of view of the characters, I mean, especially from children, Claudia, Pecola, and Frida, we can easily understand that a social movement such as Black is Beautiful, although it made a change or it marked the beginning of a change, it was not enough. So this she had very deep anxieties and skepticisms about this movement, and her skepticisms and her concerns came out in the form of a novel, that is The Bluest Eye, in 1970. And as it is, as we already know, this is a novel of child abuse. This is a novel. Race plays a central role in this novel, and also there is very much an element of class, not only race but also class. The central themes of the novel, I mean the very core issues of the novel are self-loathing. The Pecola, the central character of the novel, Pecola, the child, she is the embodiment of self-loathing, and she loses her identity, or she miserably and tragically fails in her identity formation, and she is the epitome, and she is the incarnation of all this guilt consciousness of for being a black person, for not having blue eyes, for not being fair and beautiful, and also shame. So these are the psychological effects of discriminations against African Americans. It's precisely what we understand from the novel. Let's pay a little bit attention on the title of the novel, The Bluest Eye. The Bluest Eye can be read as a pun. Means it can be read in both ways. On the one hand, it refers to the eye, the human organ for seeing. So it refers to the eyes, the vision, the sight, and also this gaze, this white gaze and also this blue eyes as the perfect model and the epitome of beauty is a notion that even the African Americans used to internalize, and this internalization is something that is severely criticized in the novel. So on the one hand, it should be criticized, but on the other hand, for children like Pecola and Frida and Claudia, one understands that it is impossible for them to resist this idea of blue eyes, especially when it is disseminated it is propagated, and it is spread in a wide variety of ways, such as the white dolls and Hollywood icons, things like that. So on the one hand, the bluest eye refers to the white gaze, or the African American or the black desire to be beautiful, to look fair, and also to be the embodiment of this notion of beauty, and which is an internalization of this white idea of beauty. On the other hand, we can read the title, The Bluest Eye, as the bluest eye, the person, the identity, and the idea of self. This is where we can read that the blue refers to the blues, the music, the typical African American music. So in that sense, that can be read as the extreme of black identity. See, so on the one hand, you have the extreme of black identity, which is a celebration of black identity, or even an assertion of black identity. But on the other hand, the bluest eye, there is this tendency to stand by and to internalize this white notion of beauty. So this title offers us two ways of existing. These are two ontological models of existence for African Americans, as we can see. In any case, the title points to the emphasis on the visual. So this is very much undeniable, and this is very much clear from the novel. The visuality of the novel, especially there are certain episodes in the novel which are very visual and which are very intimately connected to this idea of gaze. One such example is Choli's first sexual encounter, where soon after the funeral of Choli's aunt, he goes into the woods with a black girl, and they make love, and in dark, and they are encountered by two white cops, policemen, and these policemen, they find them in the light of their in their torchlight, in their flashlight, and these two white policemen, they make fun of them, they ridicule them, humiliate them, and they press Choli to go on having this sex and continue making love to the black girl. And Choli feels, that is one episode where we can see this power of white gaze, and the humiliation that the black man or the black woman, they both will have to suffer. And also this visual emphasis on the novel is displayed through other icons in the novel, which appear in the novel, such as this Shirley Temple, the Hollywood icon as the best model of beauty. So all these ideas. So on the one hand, you have Pecola's father psychologically crushed down and humiliated and ridiculed, and kind of he's completely turned upside down by this white gaze. And on the other hand, we have Pecola, who is also who is also internalizing this white idea of beauty, and who is trying to appropriate herself to that model, and who miserably fails, and she goes she goes psychologically, she goes off track, and she goes mad at the end of the novel. So there is this, on the one hand you have visibility, white visibility very prominently being played out in the novel, and on the other hand we have invisibility suffered by the black characters in the novel. One such example is Pecola's invisibility, especially for example at Jakubowski's store, where she goes in order to buy some sweets, Mary Jane, and Jakubowski, he refuses to look at her, and he refuses to look at her dirty hands. So he places the sweet on her dirty hands, and he never looks at her. So there is this invisibility of the black children and of the black identities, as we can see from the novel. So this would definitely remind one of another novel, a very famous novel by Ralph Ellison titled Invisible Man, which came out in 1952. In Invisible Man, what we see is a black character, an unnamed black character who lives in the underground, who lives in the underground, and who narrates his various life experiences. So this underground cellar in which he lives is lighted up with so many bulbs from electricity he steals from the power grid of the city. So this novel is a series of events which are about his social invisibility and also his alienation, and we can also see that his loss of identity, his identity crisis, etc. So these two novels and these two episodes, they are they correspond to each other. And when we examine the historical background of the novel, the story happens. Although the novel gets published in 1970, the story happens in 1940-41, when America was entering the World War II. So America was entering the World War II in 1940s, and it was battling nations like Germany and people like Hitler. So America's protest was actually against this Aryan notions of beauty and purity. So Hitler's idea of purity of races and Aryan blood, and this a fair-skinned and blue-eyed idea of a human being and human body. So all these things America was protesting against at that point of time. And above all, this idea of white being superior and black being naturally inferior, these are the ideas America was actually battling against. More than a military war, it had a political ideology. So overseas, America was projecting itself as the champion of democracy, but at home, what was happening? African Americans were discriminated and seen as a threat against white supremacy, white purity, national security, etc. So that continues even to our own times. It did not originate in 1970. It started long back, and it did not end with the publication of a novel. It continues even today, and there was this very popular and very phenomenal kind of a movement such as Black Lives Matter, which goes around in our own times as well. So quite interestingly, there are three prostitutes, there are three hoes who lives upstairs of this house of McTeers, and the names of these three hoes are China, Poland, and Maginot Line. Maginot Line is actually a construction in Europe built by France in order to prevent the invasion of Germany. So these are one. China is from Asia, Poland and Maginot Line are from Europe. So these are all international terms, international global signifiers which invite our attention to then international events such as World War II. And these three names are given to the prostitutes in the novel. So maybe we can read it as Toni Morrison's expression of her disinterest, her lack of interest, and her kind of aversion to the global, international events such as World War, and she was interested mainly in blacks' lives. And at this point also, what we can see is a Hollywood. In 1940s and 50s, we can see Hollywood. Hollywood was offering a distraction from the economic collapse, and it was spreading a false sense of wealth and happiness. Now we have already discussed this bit of idea of this emergence of middle class and Hollywood and things like that when we discussed the Beat Generation, and also poems such as Howl and novels such as On the Road. The emergence of Beat Generation emergence of middle class in America, things like that we have discussed. So this idea of prosperity was deliberately and it was falsely spread by different stories of Hollywood, and this notion of wealth and happiness. So there was a feeling that everybody was there was a feeling that the America was prospering, and there was a feeling that everybody was getting wealthy and everybody was becoming happier. So in order to icons in the novel, icons that figure in the novel represent from the part of Hollywood, such as Shirley Temple, and such icons, they celebrate this idea of national happiness, national prosperity on the one hand, and on the other hand, they, as far as African Americans are concerned, they cripple the identity formation of those who do not match with such standards. Then we can see a very clear technique of inversion, or this reversal by Toni Morrison in this particular novel. Imitation of Life was a 1933 novel published by Fannie Hurst. In that novel, interestingly, there is a character whose name was Peola. Peola is, in that novel, Peola is a mulatta girl. Mulatta, as we know, is a girl whose parents are both black and white. One is a black parent and the other one is a white parent. And Peola, the mulatta girl, is a character in this novel, Imitation of Life, and she hates her black mother. And there was a film adaptation of this particular novel as well. So again, an intervention, a very significant intervention from the part of Hollywood. So in this novel, what Toni Morrison does is that she inverts this pattern. In the novel, there is a black mother who hates her child, Pauline, in the black mother of Pecola, who hates her child. And who is Pecola to Pauline? Pecola is a reminder. She is a symbol of her pathetic life, her hopeless situation in life. And instead what she does is that she adores and she loves and adores the white child. Again, this adoration of the white child, the loving of the white child, and the desire for this whiteness of the white child is actually a worship of white standards. And one major critic, Agnes Suraini, she calls it the damaging internalization of immutable inferiority. So it sounds pretty sharp. The damaging internalization of immutable inferiority, the feeling that Pauline, the feeling of Pauline that she is inferior, and which is immutable. She cannot be otherwise. She can never be better. She is always inferior. She will stay inferior her whole life. this concept is internalized, and it is very damaging, it is very dangerous. Also, there is another level of inversion happens in the novel in terms of seasons. The novel begins, as we know, with autumn. It proceeds to winter, then it goes to spring, and finally it ends in summer. Now, as we know, when the novel begins, we get narrations from the part of Claudia, then also from the part of the omniscient author, things like that. Then as the novel proceeds, Pecola, interestingly, she gets raped by her own father in spring, and she goes mad in summer. So conventionally, spring is a very happy season in which children, they go out. So from winter, all those cold atmosphere is gone, and especially children, they go out and they celebrate, the flowers bloom, things like that, and everybody is happy in spring and summer. So this characteristic ambience and responses from the nature, conventional, they all go wrong in the case of a black girl like Pecola. So even nature seems to betray and cheat a very poor black girl such as Pecola, is the idea that we get. So her personal tragedy of getting raped by her own father and by going mad, and her baby is dead, so such a pathetic tragedy is magnified when those tragic episodes are placed side by side with happy seasons such as spring and summer, when other children such as Claudia and Frida, they kind of celebrate and they have a good time about it, and they do not think about it, about the tragedy of Pecola. Nobody speaks about Pecola, and they all celebrate. And with the even Claudia says that even with a guilt feeling, everybody avoids Pecola. And when the novel begins, there was this Dick and Jane episode. So we have already read it. So it can be seen as an intertext or a pretext of the novel. So we can read Dick and Jane episode in many levels. On the one hand, we can see it as it is an act of subversion when it is placed instead of a preface. So we don't have a preface to the novel as such. What we have is a pretext in the form of a Dick and Jane episode, a story. So not having a preface is itself a subversion of this idea of validation by some other author or some other white author who is in no position to validate black experience. So the convention or the usual practice in the field of literature is when you write a novel, you get a preface from somebody like a white author. We know the example of Tagore getting a preface from W.B. Yeats, things like that. So in order to validate our experience, so this not having a white author for giving a preface itself is an act of subversion and rebellion, thereby saying that the experiences of blacks or the experiences of African Americans is something that others cannot understand. So it's a way of protest against the white hegemonic experiences that usually appropriate and incorporate the other protesting voices. Then again, when you get to the story of the pretext, the Dick and Jane, there are several elements of Jane's life. The girl child of the story, who is very similar to who is comparable to Pecola. So her life, the elements of her life are father, mother, there is a cat, there is a dog, there's a house and family and friend. There are several other things as well. So all these things are of domestic spaces. She never gets out of her home. She is asking each and every character, father, mother, each and every character to play with her, and nobody plays with her. Finally a friend comes and they play with each other. So this is the story. So everything belongs to the domestic space. As interestingly, this is very much as opposed to the case of Pecola. And when the novel begins, we find Pecola going to the house of Macteus, Claudia and Frida, and they play together. Why does she go to that house? She goes to that house because she has been quote unquote put outdoors, because it means she gets thrown out by her own parents from her, that one room house, very dilapidated, very poor house. So she gets put outdoors. So as opposed to this Jane in that Dick and Jane episode. So what we see is a completely different and quite actually opposite episodes of Jane and Pecola. There is not even a line of comparison between Jane and Pecola, because their lives are too different. Their lives are too opposite is what we can see from the novel. So this text of Dick and Jane is something that schools used as a story to narrate children in order to teach something. So this pretext, what happens to the pretext? In the second episode, the pretext, it loses punctuations, and in the third version it loses space as well, which means it was moving from chaos to more chaos. It was moving from chaos to meaninglessness. So it echoes the meaninglessness of white experiences for black children, and also it is standing for this chaos, and it is standing for this tragedy of meaninglessness, this tragedy of identity, this tragedy of loss of identity for Pecola and her descent into madness. So the meaninglessness of the story parallels the meaninglessness of the life of Pecola. So basically this story, Dick and Jane story, it means and it signifies a tragedy for African Americans, is something that we learn. So she is offering a contrast, she is offering a protest in the beginning. And when we think about these two characters, we can get some light from them. On the one hand we have Pecola, and on the other hand we have Claudia. They are two different characters, because this Pecola is from the very beginning of the novel, except the three prostitutes in the novel, nobody loves her. Everybody contemns her, everybody abuses her, and contempt and abuse are heaped on Pecola from the beginning. So everybody is convinced of her worthlessness. So nobody values her, especially even her parents. Pauline, for example, in that Blueberry Cobbler episode, where Pecola and the other Claudia and Frida, they go to Pauline, they go with Pauline to the white household where she works, and Pecola spills this blueberry cobbler on the white dress of the white child, and Pauline abuses Pecola. So nobody loves her except these three prostitutes. Even her mother, Pauline despises as a symbol, as a reminder of her hopeless situation in life. Everybody ridicules her and picks on her. In school, everybody picks on her. Maureen Peale, for example, picks on her. But on the other hand, we have Claudia. She is from the very beginning of the novel, she is very rebel, and she is very confident. When Pecola says that she adores the blue eyes of Shirley Temple, Claudia says that she does not understand why everybody loves Shirley Temple and other white dolls and the blue eyes. She does not understand it, and she hates Shirley Temple and other white dolls. And the importance of Claudia in this novel is that she is the narrator of the novel. She is the part narrator of the novel, and we have the narrations by Pauline. We have also narrations from the part of the author. So Claudia narrates this Peccola's tragic story both as a child and as an adult. When the novel comes to an end, what we listen to is the voice of Claudia as an adult. So she remains ignorant of certain parts of the story. For example, she does not know the episode of Pauline and Charlie coming together, meeting and falling in love and getting married and have children, and their life deteriorates. These are episodes that Claudia is ignorant about. But at the end of the novel, she emerges as all-knowing narrator. And at the end of the novel, the kind of Claudia that we see is not as much rebel and as much confident or as much a protester as we see in the beginning of the novel when they were children. At the end of the novel, she finds herself quote unquote adjusted without improvement, which means she is trying to become like others. She is trying to avoid Peccola. She is not standing by the side of Peccola. Rather, she is avoiding Peccola, and she feels guilty about it, but she cannot not doing it. She finds herself adjusted without improvement to the white middle class norms and avoids a mad Peccola. So what we see is a Peccola. At the end of the novel, Peccola has two voices. There is a deranged conversation from the part of Peccola that we listen to at the end of the novel, in which we can see two voices. Two voices stand for and reflect the idea of the lack of a unified, the lack of a coherent identity. Her identity has been split in two, and she has lost it. So a complete failure of identity formation is something that we see at the end of the novel in Peccola, and as a result, she goes mad. She starts searching among the garbages. Is something that we can see. At the same time, Claudia stands away. At the same time, Claudia doesn't go near Peccola, and Claudia feels definitely she feels